Hi everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Welcome back everybody. Today we're doing something a little different. I am at Waiapu Cathedral in Napier, and I am sitting down with David van Oeveren. I'm going to call him Devo for short, that's what I've called him for a long time. Who is currently the Regional Dean and soon to be priest in charge of the Anglican Parish of Greater Hastings. Good morning, David.
Morena, Ian. It's great to finally do this with you.
Yeah, and another reluctant interviewee.
There's always someone more worthy than I.
Exactly. And so don't be boring today, all right? Do your best.
David,
thank you so much for agreeing to this because... I remember when you first joined Collective Intelligence, and it was, we're all about diversity and breaking down barriers and so forth, and having you come on board was just, for me, it was like a coup. It was like, this is a whole different industry, and we'll get to that very, very soon.
Yep.
So, David, where are we going to start? I am going to be really interesting because I don't know this backstory very well. I'm really interested to know, how do you start becoming an Anglican priest or any sort of a priest, and when did that first inkling first come for you as a young man? When was the first start? When was the first spark for you to think, this is what I want to spend my life doing?
Yeah, so in the church we talk about call and vocation, which are just jargon really, but for me, in many ways, I guess I've always been attracted to the church life. Why am I an Anglican? Because my parents bought a house on a hill, and on the next hill was an Anglican church, and that's where I went to Sunday school and was nurtured and felt that I belonged and I was part of a community. So I'm an Anglican because of that, and it was a really good place for me. And as part of growing up, and we just started touching on this when we were having a coffee earlier, as part of growing up, I wasn't a sports person, still not, but
it's imminent. I mean, it could happen any moment.
It could, but it's not going to. But one of the things I did do was speech and drama, and I don't have many regrets in life, but one would be that I never did my letters. So I got up to grade 8 and then I didn't go on, and so I can't teach, for example, speech and drama because I don't have my letters. I could always go back. And my speech and drama teacher said to me one day, "You're going to be a priest." And I think her comment was more the fact that speech and drama was taught in a church, and once a year, as a give back to the church, we had to go and do readings and things as part of their service. And she'd seen me in action and just went, "You're going to be a priest." And I thought, nah, never.
What age is that?
Oh, look, I would have been still at high school, maybe 15, 16.
Right. That's quite a prediction.
Yeah,
to a 15-year-old.
Absolutely. And to my best of my knowledge, she was not a church person. And as life progressed, I went from being in Sunday schools and youth groups to being a youth leader, running youth groups. That in part supported me through my tertiary study, my first degree.
Which was in what?
So I did a BA in just about every major you can imagine until I settled on world religion and education. So my first degree took 7 years.
Right. So not an athlete and a really slow learner.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I learnt the fun of...
Hang on. Did you stay at university for 7 years?
Yeah, 2 universities. So Auckland for 3, until they asked if I might choose to leave. And essentially, look, I came from a fairly disciplined schooling background, went to university, the pub was on campus. There was this whole new world of freedom and choice, and I took to it like a duck to water. So I look back on those first 3 years as succeeding with an A+ in the University of Life.
Yep.
And then the next 4 years were part-time, because actually at that stage I really needed to earn some money to pay the rent and do all of those things.
And whereabouts was that?
So started at Auckland University and then moved to Victoria University in Wellington.
Right, so fresh start.
Fresh start, much more discipline, no pub on campus, and actually found that I could succeed after that. And I think being a youth worker at that point was good. And then during that, I guess I did feel called by God to explore ordination as a vocational ministry, which is, I guess, a sense, it's a feeling. I also didn't want it. So at that stage, the Anglican Church were looking for women post-children and men in their second careers. So men who'd been a school teacher and felt called to be in ordained ministry. So I knew that I wasn't going to get chosen. The person who wrote one of my reference letters counselled me that you're not going to get chosen. And what I got instead was a yes, but we need you to finish your BA. And I was only a couple of papers away. So,
how old are you at this stage?
Mid-20s. So then from finishing my BA, I moved to Auckland to go to St John's Theological College.
So just come back to this calling,
Yep.
David. You talk about it's a feeling, like, and you resisted it initially. Because why?
Because I think my upbringing had always pointed me towards being a professional accountant, doctor, dentist. Not that I've ever wanted to be those, but that was the kind of place I was supposed to be heading, and all my friends had headed down that track, and this was contrary to everything.
Were your parents? Were your parents disappointed you going down this track?
No, I don't think so. My mother's always been incredibly understanding and supportive. My father has wrestled with it, but I think he gets it. He gets that this is what I do.
Yep. But it'll be better if you're counting numbers or...
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Classic.
My father has worked incredibly hard and has a wonderful work ethic and has a great understanding of the world and finance, and he would have loved to have seen me follow in those footsteps, and that just wasn't going to happen.
So this going from resisting it to embracing it, how long did that take?
Probably from my early 20s to my mid-20s, so say 20 to 25, and then I put myself forward thinking, well, I'll say no and I can get on with my life.
Right, yeah, I gave it a go.
Yep.
I dipped my toe in the water. They say no, and then I can become something else.
Yep.
But that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. So off to theological
Was that spooky?
college.
Was that scary?
Yeah, do you know it was? Because all of a sudden, the story I had created in my head, which was, okay, I'll respond to this, here I am, and then they'll say, but we don't want you, and I can get on with my life. All of a sudden, I couldn't do that anymore. I actually had to go, here I am, and I'm going to do this.
Yeah, you had to put your big pants on.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to picture that, at that age, because it is just such a bold move. Because you can't do it. Well, you can't do it half pie, can you? It's
you're all in or you're not.
You're all in or not. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that. So we talk about vocation, and I get paid a stipend, which is a living allowance. It's not a Monday to Friday clock in, clock out job. It's an all-of-life thing. There are very rare times when I can just be David.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's an all-in thing. You're in. I'm sure we'll get to it, but when we first met, which was in sort of Paeatua, I was seen as a little bit different and unique because I like going to the Black Stump to listen to live music. And at that stage I was a smoker and I enjoyed an RTD bourbon. And so I was this anomaly.
And you had an earring.
And I had an earring.
Devo, that was just, we'll get to this, but that was almost satanic type thing to my mother. It was just like, he's got an earring.
Yep.
Yeah. Immediately I thought, I haven't met this guy. Sounds interesting. Okay, so going back to your... Okay, so then they've said, yes, finish your degree, so you do that. And then what happens?
Moved to St John's Theological College, which is a 3-year academic and formation time. So you do the Bachelor of Theology, which is the academic, and it's about formation. And to me, the richness of theological education, residential, is that it's a melting pot of culture and theological viewpoints. So I'd probably grown up predominantly in a more social justice focused Christian structure. So the church that I grew up in, just prior to my political awareness, was one of the staging posts for the Springbok Tour protests.
Yes.
So that was 81. 85, my political awareness had sharpened, and we were part of the homosexual law reforms and marching down Queen Street for law reform, 84, 85. So that had been where my faith had been formed. And then I go to St John's Theological College and I find there's this whole breadth of Christian and religious belief, which I had to grapple with. And we were thrust into Pākehā, Māori, Pacific Island, Melanesian. So it's a whole cultural and religious melting pot.
And some of that was contra to some of your views of the world beforehand?
Certainly challenged them, and that's that formation part, that you suddenly realise you've got to live within a much bigger spectrum to what you've normally operated in.
Is that good for you?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the lecturers there talked a lot about difference and otherness.
Yep.
And I think that stood me in good stead, that whilst I still have a whole lot of prejudices, engaging with otherness is something I really relish, and I encourage myself to do that.
Yeah, the otherness is yeah. Anyway,
it's the otherness that bites, in a sense. You know.
Yeah, it is. That's so 3 years in that. So you have, that's a lot of study over a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah.
From the time you started Auckland and then go through Vic and then back into this, that's a lot of study.
Yep.
And are you, and through that training, are you involved in churches and so forth on a practical sense?
Yep. Yes, I was, and I was really lucky. So you're encouraged over the 3 years to engage with a different community each year. So my first year I did engage with several communities, but I settled on All Saints in Ponsonby. Had a really interesting history of being an inner city suburb, lower socioeconomic, but it was becoming quite gentrified. And it had a young priest called Jim White, who subsequently became a bishop and sadly recently died. And he was a major part of that formation for me, because he did explore the world in different ways, and he was open to the changing culture of Ponsonby and how the church has to stay relevant. So he was a major part of that formation for me.
Interesting that, for a lot of people will either have not known or forgotten that Ponsonby, once upon a time, was not Flash.
Absolutely. And right at the moment, it's quite in the media for the Black Panthers and all of that stuff, which is a story that, in a sense, I think we've forgotten.
Yep.
Which is why it's important we're retelling it.
Yep. That was, Ponsonby was the South Auckland of Auckland,
Absolutely.
back then. Yeah. So that's going back to that melting pot and the other. That's a great place to slot into that, because it's funny. Initially, when you said Ponsonby, I go, "Oh yeah, that's upper," but not back then.
No,
yeah,
it was into that gentrification.
Yep.
But it still wasn't what we experience now.
Yeah, it took a long time to happen. What was it like? What was it like standing up in front of a congregation for the first few times?
Yeah, interestingly, it's not just for the first few times. I still find it when I stand up in front of a new congregation or a congregation I don't know. Look, I can be very nervous, and it can be quite frightening. But I've come to a point of going, actually, this is about love. It's about, if I love them and they love me back, we start to build a relationship. And one of the things, again, coming back to that word formation, after theological college, I went to live in and did a 2-year, which is more, it's less academic, it's more formation and practical training. And about 5 years ago, I landed here in the cathedral as the acting dean. And on the very first Sunday, I did 8 o'clock, and it's reasonably small. It's in the small chapel, felt very ordinary. And then I came to the 10 o'clock and went, whoa, I'm way out of my depth.
Right.
And then I thought back to my training in Levin, which taught me in small country church in Levin, which was quite big at that point. And the kind of formation and training I'd had, and went, actually, you can do this. So what's it like standing in front of a congregation for the first time? It can be scary. And it can be scarier the second or third time when you've worked out who's in front of you.
Right.
Because actually, most people are very clever, intelligent people in their own right.
Yep.
And so you stand in front of people and you go, actually, I've got to come up to their level, or I've got to meet them where they're at.
And you have got, without being demeaning, you have got a job to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I have often thought that because from the congregation, the priest mostly looks really comfortable in the role.
Yep.
And I've often thought, I wonder if that's true.
Yeah, it is true, because I'm trying to think if I can get all 4 Ps, but prayerfully plan, prepare, practice, and present. Right? So I think if you haven't prayerfully planned and prepared and practiced, then the presentation falls apart.
Right.
And so even now on a Sunday, and I've been doing this 20 years, I have a run sheet which tells me where I start and where I finish and what's in between.
Right.
It's a weekly discipline for me. What do I have to achieve in the Sunday service? When I'm taking a funeral, the name is there in front of me. I don't rely on memory. Even if I know the person who has died and the family really well, I write it down. Weddings always script their names, even if I've worked a lot with that couple and I know them.
Yeah,
because it couldn't be anything worse than calling you by the wrong name at your wedding.
Yeah, or a funeral would be possibly even worse. So you go to Levin,
yep.
And you are called what then at that point?
So I was a curate, which denotes I'm in training.
Yep. And your week looks like what?
When I was in Levin, the week looked like every second week there was a funeral once I was up to doing that. So there was a lot of training before I was let loose. And the priest who trained me, he was wonderful because he was really into showing me to a point where he thought I could do it. And then he'd step back and let me go for it. So it was a big funeral parish, so there would be a funeral a fortnight for me as a curate. I ran all the youth ministry, so oversaw the Sunday school, ran the youth group. And I did a lot of the rest home ministry as well. And while we were there, so I was there 2 years, about 11 months in, we had our first child. And actually I often took her with me to rest homes, and it was just great. It was a great relationship building thing in a rest home to put the baby on the blanket on the floor, talk to the people.
Yep. So let's just go back.
Yep.
You are you had a wife to have a baby with?
Oh, I did, yes.
Yeah. So I apologise, but we're going to get to it at some point. You just dropped that in. Right. So when did you meet Sue?
So Sue and I met when we were about 16 the first time.
Oh.
Yeah, so we were together for a little while. And then, Sue, sorry, can't remember. I think we had a couple of years in between, and when we were about 18, we got together.
Right.
I think that's about right. So we were together 7 years before I very unromantically agreed to marry her.
Oh, God. You agreed. Did she ask you?
No, but it was her birthday, and I probably said something like, "Did you get everything you wanted for your birthday?" And she went, "Well, I was." "Oh, okay. Would you like to get married?" You know, it was sort of very unromantic.
Terrible.
Shocking.
Yeah. Okay.
I've prepared lots of couples for weddings.
Yes.
And mine would be the most shocking and embarrassing story of proposal.
Right. David van Oeveren, the very unromantic proposal person. Right.
Yeah.
So she agreed to marry you.
She did.
Yep.
Delighted to say.
And, yeah, that's a long time you guys have been together.
Yeah, so we've just celebrated 25 years of marriage, plus 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got 3 kids.
3 kids, yep.
And they're not the top, but you've got an athlete.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. So well done.
He is my son, I know that. But,
yeah.
He takes after his mum.
Yeah, because I was thinking this is interesting because we were talking about his athletic achievements, and it doesn't come from you. Okay. So then through Levin, because I'm really interested in this journey, Devo, because we don't, you don't get to see this journey, right? From the parishioner's point of view, we don't get to see this. What happens before. You just turn up in a parish and we don't know what's happened before. So how long did you stay in Levin for?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
And then where?
Then I went to Pāhiatua in Eketahuna, which is where I encountered your mum and consequently you for the first time. So that, there's kind of a bit of a story to that in the sense that your first parish, the bishop really places you, or he strongly encourages a parish to take you. But at some point while I was at St John's College, I visited a woman priest who had been part of my childhood. And she said, all you young ones, you all want the plum urban parishes and you don't do a rural stint. And interestingly, I've predominantly been in provincial or rural ministry, and yet I'm an Aucklander. And
you hide it well, though.
Yeah. I had some good mentors in places like Pāhiatua. So I think I arrived in Pāhiatua not really knowing where it was. Like when I was told that was most likely where I was going, I had to say, well, can I get in a car and just go and check out where this place is? And we had over 7, nearly 8 years of absolute wonderful time there. So many ministers will tell you their first parish was the best one.
Right.
And part of that is, I think for me, it's about a stage of life. So we arrived with one child and we left with three.
Yep.
When you're at that stage in your life, you're engaging with play centres and kindergartens and primary schools, and so you're building friendship networks just naturally. And I took a parish on that probably was struggling, and I was part of rebuilding that. But it was a parish that had so much potential already, and it just hadn't been realised for a few years. So it had had a period where the leadership hadn't been as strong, and everything came together for me. And they had a trust fund which they started utilising for the ministry of the church, and it was a great 7, nearly 8 years.
I remember when you came to town, David. My mother was I was going to say semi-regular churchgoer. She loved the Bible. She loved she loved history. She studied history at Teachers College and so forth. And I remember her coming back from church and going, "We've got a new minister. He's very young, and he's got an earring." And I did say, "What ear was the earring in, Mother?" And she goes, "Why?" I said, "Well, it's
kind of important.
It's good and important." And I sort of had that conversation. She says, No, he's got a wife and a child. I said, "Oh, it could be just a front." She said, it was sacrilege. But anyway, so I heard about you long before I met you.
Yep.
How old were you when you went to Paotua?
Just over 30. So about 30.
Yeah, so Paotua had not had that. So I remember some of the ministers, and they were in their 50s. Yep. So having somebody, it was a shock to my mother, and I also remember at the time there was I think there might have been a Maori bishop, or anyway, I remember she came back one day and she was most perturbed because there had been Māoris spoke in the church and she didn't know what they were talking about, and she was quite upset about that as well. It was fascinating.
So Pahiatua was really interesting for me, having come from that sort of social justice, faith-based place of both my upbringing and All Saints Ponsonby, to arrive in... So the day I started, so it was end of 99, probably November 99, and it was election day. And so the day I was installed in Pahiatua and Eketahuna, the seat went from long-standing National Conservative to Labour, and not just Labour, but to Georgina Bayer, transgender,
colourful,
well known as I think she was the mayor of Carterton.
Yep.
So my first 6-8 weeks were full of this incredible story of going from blue to red, from Conservative National Party to very colourful Labour.
That must have been a boundary change. I'm trying to think about that. That must have been a boundary change at that point, because with populations and so forth. We had literally the Prime Minister, Keith Holyoe was our, and then we had Falloon. But yeah, it was staunch. They wouldn't have even known who the Labour candidate was in Paotua. Yep. That there was even a Labour candidate. Yeah, that would have really ruffled the feathers in that. And so, David, going in there, and I remember, and just some context here, before that, so you arrived in Paotua in what year?
99, end of 99.
Right. So I had left Paotua in about 1992, I think, and we'd gone to Northland. And so I'd left town, but, would venture back a lot, and that's where I met you. But I remember the two ministers Doug Weaver was a very influential guy, and then there was Ian McLennan came after that, who was really very solid. And it was interesting that Doug, it was the first time I actually enjoyed going to church, because he could really tell a yarn. You know, he was very personable. He wasn't stuffy. He drank alcohol, went to parties, he sang, and he mixed with the congregation. He didn't set himself above, because we'd had a bit of that beforehand. And he and the old man became good mates. My father would go to church but wasn't really into it, and he'd sit there and jiggle change in his pocket, and my mother would go, "Be quiet, Bill," and so then he'd go to sleep, you know. And I remember on a Friday afternoon, Doug would often come out, and I think he was an ArchDeacon when he was in Paotua, and he'd come out on a Friday afternoon, and he'd walk in, and he and the old man would sit down over the kitchen table, and they'd have a drink, and he'd just walk in, the old man would look at him and go, "Tough week, Doug?" And he'd go, "Yeah, tough week." And then my mother would come out, and she'd start getting all tizzy because Doug was there, and the old man would go, "Oh, for God's sake, leave him alone, woman. Get out." He said he's had enough of you lot. And so they would sit down and they would talk for hours. And all the old man would ever say was, because nobody was allowed in the kitchen when Doug was there and they'd be talking, and all he would say was, "That's a tough job at times."
And so Doug was wonderfully personable and relatable. And in ministry, you always need someone who gets it, but isn't necessarily in church every Sunday, is not on your vestry, that you can just sit down and chew the fat with. And I've had some wonderful mentors, particularly through both Pahiatua and Fielding, that I've just been able to go, "Yeah, it's been a bit of a tough week." And so on the back of one of your last podcasts with Carla, you know, you take a couple of funerals around suicide, and it's a tough week. And to have someone like your father was to Doug, who you can just go and say, "Tough week, have a whiskey and head off home," is really important.
Yeah.
And the other thing about Doug was he was an extrovert in many ways. So unfortunately for many parishioners, most of us called to ministry on a Myers-Briggs are introverts.
Right.
And that becomes, so we do the extroverted stuff, the worship, the funerals, the weddings, and then we go...
Exhausted.
Yep. I'm pretty sure Doug lived in the extroverted world. So he did the people stuff so well. You know, he liked to be
Absolutely.
the life and soul of a party.
Yep.
Whereas I get to a party and I find someone I know and I sit in a corner.
Yeah. And I often wondered whether he was actually any good and I don't need to discuss this, whether he was actually any good as a minister or not, right? Because what we saw was the extroverted, outgoing person, right? And I often thought, what if he's actually any good at what he's supposed to be doing, right? And we don't need a conversation around that. It was just something that because everybody... because he was a fresh of breath air coming into Paotua from what we'd had before.
Yep.
And people enjoyed going to church to listen to the sermon because he was very... he told a good yarn. And look, you and I have had this conversation. I remember I had this conversation at my mother's funeral, which you took and did a stunning job. I think you actually came back for that. I can't remember. But I remember having the conversation at that funeral how I debated with my mother for years that, you know, she said my father wasn't a Christian and she wasn't overly happy with that. And I said, but he does all this stuff for people because the old man was, you know, he loved doing things. And he said, yes, he's a humanitarian. And I said, well, that's okay, isn't it? Yes, but he's not a Christian. But he would practice stuff where I saw my mother as an academic Christian, and I'm not talking behind her back because we had these conversations for years with my mother, and I remember at the funeral you said, I'm happy to take up that conversation with you. And I remember saying it wouldn't be as much fun with you. I was concerned you might win or something.
Yeah, I think my encounter of people is that all people have some kind of faith, and they live it out in different ways.
Yep.
And I don't think you have to go to church on a Sunday to live a good life. But for some people, that is where their nourishment comes from. From other people, it's maybe giving money towards a third world country. For others, it's going, actually, they just need a hand splitting firewood next week.
Yep.
So I think it's that whole spectrum.
Yep. I'm just going to add in there where I saw my mother's faith really come into play was we both went over. I had an older sister, Jude, who was dying of cancer in Toronto, and my mother went over there. She was over there for maybe 3 months, and I went over for the last 7 weeks of my sister's life, and we worked together. And it was one of the few times in our life that we didn't argue. We were united in that. But you know what? I was phenomenally proud of her through that period, David, because I could see her lean on her faith and help everybody around her deal with this tragedy. And yeah, she was like a rock through that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any parent would want to or prepare for bearing one of their children, but she went through that and she drew on her faith, and I was phenomenally proud of her, and she helped everybody around her deal with this. And it was lovely to see, actually. It was lovely to see her being able to really practice that faith. Yeah.
There's lots of things in ministry you park or let go of, and there are things that you remember. So I remember the day that your mother rang me from Canada and said, my daughter's just died, we need to start putting in plans, some preparations. And I remember that phone conversation. And it was her faith that she leant on during that time to get her through, because in all the situations I've had to deal with that are difficult for people, it's burying a child that can be the most difficult. Because that's not the right order of things. And we all expect that we will pass away, we will die before our children. And so to not only have a child predecease you, but to spend 3 months at their bedside, which is what she did. She leant into her faith. She leant into God to get her through that time. And the fact that the two of you didn't argue in that time is pretty significant.
It was a wonderful time, David. It really was, because while it was heartbreaking, we got a chance to say goodbye and all of that, and we could share it together, and it really did unite us through that period. But it was, I was phenomenally proud of, and it was, I could tell that she was drawing from that faith, and I also remember we had a service for my sister in Canada, and then we had a memorial service back in Paotua where her husband brought her ashes out and so forth. And I remember the great character Bill Bendel, who often joked, because they spent a lot of time together after my father died, and Bill was quite a character, and he was in his 80s and vital, and how would I describe it? He was a wonderful Christian character. Used to wear a beret, changed his name to Pierre, I think, in his mid-80s because he thought Bill was a bit boring.
Yeah.
And I remember scattering Jude's ashes, and Bill was there, and it was just, it was great to have that foundation to work from.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Bill Bendel was one of my mentors through that time in Pahiatua, that young, that young, probably a bit rough around the edges vicar that needed to be shaped. Bill was the guy who would quietly take me aside and go, you know what, that's not going to work well for you.
Right.
So how about you try this?
Yeah.
And actually the Bendel and the Carthew family were quite crucial. But Bill was the one who would go, do you know what, if you're going to do that, this is the potential outcome. Right. But how about you jump in the car and go and chat to them over the fence?
Yeah. Yeah. What are the most challenging things for you then, now? What are the most challenging things that you face?
So one level, I want to say putting myself out there is a thing that kind of introversion. I often wish that Doug Weaver had have mentored me a bit, because he seemed to be able to just rock up to someone's place and chew the fat. And I've always struggled with that in ministry, that kind of cold calling, just turning up stuff. I am really good at funerals, but I've taken a lot of suicides, and those tend to be on that edge of really challenging.
Despair.
One of my first funerals was, in fact, a couple of my first funerals were suicides, and I was really lucky in both of those that the families were quite open about it, so we could name it. So there you go. There's two things. One's the job at me. So suicides can be really draining and difficult, even though I know I'm really good at taking a funeral.
Why are you so good at taking funerals?
Because when I sit with the family, I listen, and I listen throughout the funeral. So I don't, even though there are set things that I need to do as an Anglican priest, I try and shape it around their needs. And there's a lot of us who do that. So it's not just me, but and it's a part of ministry I really enjoy. And it might be to do with the fact that a funeral it's a very tight time frame, 2 to 4 days. So you go from having never met the people to knowing their most intimate secrets, and also knowing they're trusting you with that, not to take it into the future. So it's a really humbling ministry. Weddings, I enjoy weddings, but they're stretched out often over 18 months, that preparation. In case we don't come back to it, your wedding, which I was part of, geez, I've never been so nervous at a wedding at all. God, I've been judged by half. But something that you and Kate taught me, and I've done it at every wedding since, is that kind of before the wedding, you know, you guys come from different groups, you might not have met people, we want you to engage with each other. While we're waiting for the bride to arrive, go and introduce yourself to someone you don't know. I do that at every wedding. That's something you guys gifted me, really.
Interesting. Look, we really enjoyed the day. We really enjoyed the service. We did have friends come from different backgrounds. It was my second marriage. It was Kate's first wedding. And I said to you beforehand, I felt awkward about a week out. I got cold feet that, you know, Kate wanted to do this traditional wedding. And I'm going, I've been married before, so I had, you know, stuff going off on me with that. And we had a really fun day. And it was about mixing people up, and, you know, it wasn't just about us, it was about everybody around us.
But it was about social justice and food banks and, you know, that I think the only thing from my perspective that didn't quite go to plan, it went much better than planned, was you said bring something for the food bank and we'll have a trailer. And in my mind, I anticipated a trailer full of food. This thing was a huge double axle and it was overflowing. And we hadn't quite strategized where we were going to park it and how that was going to happen. And people just, I think that showed the generosity and the goodness of people.
And I do, we thought we don't want presents. I'm not into, I'm not big on presents. And people wanted to give. And so it was a really simple decision, and I'm not sure how we got to it, but as soon as we did, we went, that's what we want. We want people to bring something for the local food bank, and people really stepped into that, really stepped into that, and that was, one of the great gifts of the day, and and it was a really fun day. And I also remember that you couldn't stay because you had to work the next day, And so it was on a Saturday, and because I do like getting on the terps with you. I mean, you might be an introvert, but you're actually quite an interesting introvert, But it's classic that I remember Doug Weaver saying that occupational hazard, that you've got to go home at a reasonable hour because you do have to work the next day.
Yep.
And that was something that was that we did miss with that. And it's about, I think,
actually through collective intelligence, we've had quite a few nights.
We have. Actually, let's talk about that. I was living in Fielding and went to a bookshop one day that had a cafe, and lo and behold, you turn up next to me. Mm-hmm. G'day, Devo. I didn't call you Devo. Hello, David. And so what are you doing? You said that you were the ArchDeacon then in Fielding, weren't you? You'd gone from Pāhia to Fielding?
From Pāhia to Fielding. I was the parish priest of the Ōroua, which is the Fielding area, and ArchDeacon of Manawatu. And you went, have I got the deal for you?
Well, I didn't
say that.
I
never got the knives, though, that went with the deal. But
No, you didn't. They're on the post. I remember saying to you that must be a lonely job. And it was interesting to see your reaction because you were still, I still see you as being young, but I thought, well, you're a young ArchDeacon with that big job. And I remember saying to you, that must be lonely. And interesting to see your reaction to that. And I went, yeah, it can be. And, part of the thing with collective intelligence is, people get in positions that can be really lonely. And, consequently you joined a team. I was facilitating then. And I remember your first day, and we went to, I'm not sure how you pronounce it correctly, but Ōroua Parish down in Takapau.
Yep.
Lovely big old building, and that's where the meeting was, and you and I drove there together, and I didn't realise that you were fretting about where am I sleeping tonight, and we were late getting there, and we just went straight into the meeting, but I didn't know that was going on. But my great delight, Devo, was when new members come in, they do their timeline, they introduce themselves, and I remember it so well that you were explaining, people were fascinated. How does this thing work? This church thing work? Yep. Do you remember this conversation?
I do, and I was trying to put it into sort of secular speak, and an ArchDeacon's like a middle management, and I do. And then the
question. Do you remember the final question?
No.
Somebody asked, so who's the boss? And you went, well, that would be God. And it was just the most memorable line. And everybody's going, oh, yeah, God. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Kind of glad I got the answer right.
It was just, the most beautiful memory of everybody going, nodding, going, yeah. Oh, right, yes. And I totally forgot they were looking at it just from an organisational background. Yep. And look, it was wonderful having you in the team, because you just brought a whole lot of skills, which were fabulous to have in the team. And I remember you put them to use in the very, very first day when somebody had something quite big to put on the table, and watching you bring all your training out.
Yep.
And around love, around acceptance, about having a choice. And I remember you saying to this person, so what are you going to choose to do? Because at the time I think she thought she only had one avenue, and you pointed out there were lots of different avenues.
Yep.
And it was wonderful to see that in motion. Yeah.
So it's really interesting hearing you say that, because I guess what I'm thinking is I'm not sure how much value I added to the group, and you've just confirmed that even in my first meeting I added value to the group, which is something that I've always wrestled with in a sense.
So let's talk about that. What, as a kid, you see a minister up in front of the church and they're perfect, right? And they are presented as having their shit together, and they're perfect and they do their thing.
And then you become one and you realise they're not perfect.
So what's the thing that you grapple with as a person?
I think I grapple with... So one of the gifts that collective intelligence gave me was when I came into the role I'm currently in, they helped me form a bit of a job description.
Right.
And I still use it regularly. In fact, I've got a copy here with me, but I pulled it out a month ago to say to people, this is what I do. And the only thing I would say that team meeting got wrong is the last thing on the list should have been the first thing on the list.
Right.
So I've brought it up to be the first thing. And that is, believe you're the right person for the job.
Right.
And so they kind of gave me this list of things that I do as a regional dean and said at the bottom, and by the way, remember you're the best person for the job.
Yep.
And I've brought that up. So what I would say is I'll talk for me. I haven't got all my shit together. I'm just an ordinary person who, for whatever reason, has entered into this vocation, has been set aside by God to do this role. And I need to believe that I add value to the role and a group like Collective Intelligence.
What's God to you?
What's God to me? God is a way of being. Geez, that's a good question, Harv. And I said I wouldn't say that in this, but that is a good question. So God is not the fluffy the man sitting on a fluffy cloud in the sky. God is the being that created where we are at now. And so for me, I err on the evolution side rather than the creationist side.
Mm-hmm.
That science and modern science and COVID science, vaccinations, are part of the goodness of God. And that the Bible is a collection of stories that point us to how we should and shouldn't live our lives. So there are some horrible stories in the Bible which are about this is how we shouldn't live. And there are some wonderful stories that talk about how we should. So loving our neighbour in whatever form that takes. Mm-hmm. And damn, that's hard at times.
Yep.
In fact, one of the blessings that many priests give at the end is those you love and pray for, or those you love and find difficult to love, because there are so many people we find difficult to love.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about trying to find a way to build that community, to build that, going right back to the beginning of this conversation, that bridge to the otherness, the difference.
I had a conversation with a guy on the way here today, and we're talking about how we're seeing a number of groups of people out there at the moment are struggling with the world that is evolving and changing. It's changing really quickly, and people aren't very... It's like the world's taking them by surprise, that COVID has sped some change up, and there is all sorts of things going on, and people are feeling quite unsettled, and life is not quite as sure as it was before. And I, that other thing, it's one of the things I'm really proud of with collective intelligence, is that we break down barriers, we form connections that wouldn't be there. Having you in a team was something I'm really proud of to have, and I would like more ministers in teams, right? Because what was interesting was to see your team respond to you, because there was a bunch of heathens in your team.
Yep.
And they just treated you as David van Oeveren.
Absolutely.
And they also respected what you did. And struggled with Christianity, right?
Yep. And the strength of the team that I was part of is that cross so many different vocations, careers, that respect of different position, which is across all groups, I think, all teams.
Yep. Yes, it is. And it's something that I was talking to this guy today, and the thing that I am going to work on next, which I'm struggling with, is this gender-neutral thing that's emerged. And I just go, I don't get that. So I've talked to a young man who's transgender, wonderful young guy, and I said, I need help with this. I don't get this thing, and I need to learn about this. And I've become really not disciplined, but as soon as I find something, I go, oh, I don't get that. I go, right, I need to go and learn about that, because, you mentioned intelligent, before, that it's so easy to sit on the outside and judge people and go, what's wrong with them?
Absolutely.
Instead of going, what don't I get about them? Because they're people and they've got a different view from me. And so what do I need to do to understand their view? I don't have to agree with them, I don't think. No, I don't have to agree with them, but I do need to understand them, I think.
So the world is changing incredibly rapidly at the moment, and I think COVID's heightened that, and so it's around employment, it's around finance, banks, particularly, I think probably in urban areas as well, but provincial New Zealand, just going to a local bank is an issue now.
Yep.
And that's a post-COVID thing. All sorts of things are changing incredibly rapidly, and certainly the gender fluidity or the acceptance of different sexualities is just huge. And I love having that conversation with my kids, which is kind of like, I'm not that old. But when I was your age and watching TV, there were no gay couples. I remember the first gay couple on Shortland Street, for example. And now it's kind of really commonplace. So it's important for us to find people in our lives who can take us on that journey with them. So I know that you had, was it Eva?
Yes.
As part of that journey for you. And I'm...
So Eva was transgender.
Transgender.
And I remember when she, said so, and then she was a woman, and she said, so I started, and she'd had children, and she said to us, so when she introduced herself to our team, that, I started my life as a male. And we're all just sitting there with this look of trying to work out the most impossible equation. And she said, and the children I've got, I sired, I didn't give birth to them. And we were just sitting there going, what?
How does that work?
What? Yeah. And Eva was so important for my development, so important. And the stuff I learnt more from Eva than anybody else, I think I can remember, because she talked about being an architect as a male and then being an architect as a female, and how differently she was treated from one sex to the other, and how as a male doors would open for her, and as a female doors would close for her.
Yep.
And the other thing, when you talk about the other and go, right, so that's seriously not cool. Yeah.
Yep.
And as males, we don't see that. We don't experience that.
Yep. Over the last 5 years, I've discovered an author I really enjoy called Charity Norman, and she resides here in Napier and also in Wellington, and she's written an amazing book about gender dysphoria, and each of her books follows a particular theme. So one is around methamphetamine addiction, P addiction. Her one around gender dysphoria really helped me begin to kind of get my head around what's that about, that you're a man but you want to be a woman. And it was a very helpful book for me to begin that journey of unpacking.
Yep. And Eva, I said to her, when did you think that you were in the wrong body? And she said, when I was 3. I go, really? It's just, it's not I was just brought up thinking it was black and white, and how simple can that be? Yeah. And it appears it's not quite that black and white. Yeah.
Yep.
So, David, you're just about to change roles.
I am.
So you have been. What's role have you been doing here?
So I've been essentially for the last 5 years. I've been regional dean in Hawke's Bay and then Eastland as well. So working with Bishop Andrew, the Bishop of the Diocese of Waiapu, and looking after a geographical area from Woodville in the south through to Ruatoria in the north.
Right.
And loved that role. And just recently learnt that I'm going to transition into a different role.
Yep, so we'll get to that. So this roving commission, Woodville to Ruatoria, is just, it's a small country.
Absolutely.
And so you had a roving commission supporting
parishes that, all of the parishes really. So probably I've particularly focused on those that have been struggling.
Yep.
But I've kind of been across all of the parishes. The ones I've spent the least time in are the ones that are going really well.
Yep.
And I've enjoyed that role, and kind of as I'm in that transition, I've been thinking about what is it I've enjoyed and what is it that I've learnt, and I think it's given me a breadth of experience that I wouldn't have been able to have in any other way if I'd been simply gone from one parish to another.
Yep.
So I've been I've led worship in little churches with 9 people.
Yep.
Through to being the acting dean of the cathedral, which
with hundreds of people,
which has services at Christmas with hundreds of people.
Yep.
And I've been able to look at probably management in a different way, and certainly governance in a quite a different way to what I would get in a parish setting.
Mm. And what do you? So going in to work with a parish that might be going through some issues or whatever, what are the key things you look for there?
Firstly, where the hope is for them, because often they've got into a bit of a downward spiral.
Yep.
And so where are the good things that they're doing? Where are their success stories? And there are always success stories. And then you focus on the hope of those, and then what is possible for them to do. And probably the hardest part of that, what is possible for them to do, is to get them to be realistic. So it's all very well putting this big ideal up on the board, but are you going to achieve it?
Yep.
Let's aim for something realistic that you're going to win on.
And I was going to ask you a specific question there, but I'm going to retract that, because every situation would be different, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Every situation would be different.
Yep.
And so you've been doing that for
5 years.
5
Just
years.
over 5.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now there's been a restructure going on, and you're going back into becoming a parish priest
I am.
in Hastings.
In Hastings.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly, it's happened a lot sooner and much quicker than I'd anticipated.
Yep.
But I've always said that this was the regional dean role was a thing I'd do for a period of time, and then I'd return to parish ministry.
Yep.
And so it's just happened quicker and faster.
And so does that mean that you have got, you're in charge of one church?
So, interestingly, it's 2 churches and some other communities. So we will call it initially Greater Hastings.
Yep.
So it's an amalgamation of 2 existing parishes, plus taking into account 2 previous parishes that existed. So it's probably, I guess if you were to frame it negatively, it's a retrenchment. But I think I'd like to frame it more positively and say it's the new way of being, and I get to be at the formation of that. So ultimately, if I and the team that I'm going to be working with make this work, it'll flourish into the future.
Yep. I remember going back to Doug Weaver that, you know, he was hugely charismatic, and I remember people talking that, you know, he would make a great bishop, right? Whether he would or not, I don't know. But I remember him saying that he didn't even want to entertain that, because ultimately what he enjoyed was being with people, and that's what spun his wheels.
Yep.
Was being involved, because I remember he went from there down to Carterton. That's what he wanted to do. Yeah.
It's always very, very scary to say you don't want to do something in God's hearing, because sometimes it just comes to fruition.
Yep. Yeah.
But I certainly understand what Doug was getting at, and I would probably add to that every role I've ever had, I've never sought out.
Right.
And in fact, the ones I have sought out, I've either not got, or at some point we've discerned that's not the right thing.
Yep.
So every shift I've ever had has come looking for me.
Yep.
Whether that's a direct shoulder tap from a bishop or a process of discernment and calling. And I think that's really what Doug was saying too, that his calling was to be amongst the people.
Yep. When I facilitated the day that you hosted back in Fielding, when you had your host day, and you had just had a new bishop appointed for Wellington.
Correct.
At that point, he was an interesting fella.
So Bishop Justin has a ministry that is probably quite unique as an Anglican bishop, and it seems to be bearing fruit in the Wellington Diocese.
He was pretty left field, wasn't he? In the traditional sense.
Your mother had a problem with the fact that I had an earring.
Yeah. I was
he has dreads and bare feet.
Yeah. He was definitely out there. What happened to the earring, Devo?
Oh, look, I was lucky enough to get a ride to Hamilton and back on a Harley, and every time I took the helmet off, it hurt. So I took it out, and it just never went back in. But I'd have to say, actually, it's been something I've been thinking about with this transition I'm about to go through, that maybe it's time to throw another one in.
Put it back in.
Yeah,
you're a lot more interested with the earring. Yeah. So, what makes a good bishop?
What makes a good bishop? Do you know what? I think a lot of being a good bishop is the characteristics that Doug had, actually. I think that whole personable, likes mixing and mingling with people, is good at listening to a good story, but also good at giving a good story. I think that's what makes a good bishop. Someone who cares deeply for their clergy and the people they serve. One of the definitions of a bishop is the pastor to the pastors.
Yep.
And so I think that's what makes a good bishop.
What are the biggest challenges you face now within the Anglican Church?
Like many organisations, numbers is one of our biggest challenges. We're in a phase of history where people don't tend to be joiners of organisations and clubs. So in the church, I think we can often get woe is me. Our congregations are in decline in some places.
Yep.
But actually, if you look at those places, so is the bowling club, and the volunteer fire brigade is struggling, and there's just a whole generation or a couple of generations that aren't joiners of those things. So numbers is a challenge for us. The church, many people view us as being very wealthy, and I guess we are asset rich, but we're cash poor.
Yep.
And so we're sitting in the cathedral here, and it's currently undergoing seismic testing, and we know that it's going to need some work, and it's a very solid concrete building, and in fact in this room we're sitting in there's going to be a passageway built, but we don't necessarily have the available cash for that, so we own this wonderful facility. So that's going to be a big challenge for us going forward, as it is for much of New Zealand, and particularly provincial and rural New Zealand. So places like Fielding, where earthquake strengthening in the town is a big issue. Mm. And one way of resolving that that I see as I travel around is they build these box shops, so Briscoes and Warehouse and all of that go there. But that just empties out the centre of town and makes it worse. So I think those would probably be two of our biggest challenges, sort of the lack of joining and probably some of the compliance issues that are facing us.
Right.
But alongside of those challenges, I believe that whilst people might not define themselves as necessarily Christian, they might use the word spiritual, and that people are seeking, by and large, some understanding of what this life is about. And my experience, so I don't know how widespread this is, was that COVID and the lockdown actually sharpened our focus on what is the meaning of life? Mm-hmm. What is our purpose? Mm-hmm. And so I see some really good things coming out of a very difficult situation.
Yep, and spirituality, I think, is alive and well, and I think there are lots of people out there seeking something more than just being busy. I see an epidemic of busy people, Devo, and I think it masks all sorts of stuff underneath that. Yep. It's a numbing process.
Yep.
And it's a barrier for us as well at times, for people of just getting them to stop and reflect and nourish themselves in some way, because being busy is just, it's an epidemic out there.
Yep.
And I get frustrated. I've said it before on other podcasts when people say, "Are you busy?" And I go, "I work too hard to be busy." and I really mean that. The last thing I want to be is busy, because I know when I'm busy I'm disorganised, and I'm just, it's not productive and it's not fun, but we see it as a good thing. If you're busy, that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. And there's got to be more to life than just being busy.
Yep.
And, it's interesting. I've struggled going to church. I struggle with some of the words. I struggle with some of the old meanings and so forth. And I sit there and go, I'm not sure I want to listen to this. And yet there are other times I sit there and listen to a great sermon and so forth. And you guys must get really good training in that, because I've seldom heard a poor sermon.
Yep.
And you often sit there and go, man, I need this right now.
It's amazing how things talk to you in that moment.
Yep.
And, look, we do get good training and formation, but it becomes part of that discipline of... so when I was at St John's Theological College, and one of my lecturers, I asked for an extension on an essay, and she went, no. Because when you get out into the real world and do parish ministry, you are producing at least one essay a week. No extension, because Sunday happens. And so, and I talked earlier about how I do a run sheet for every service, and that is the first step of going, so what am I preaching about this week? What do the readings say? Where's that message going to go? And I'd have to say one of my disciplines is I never get to Saturday without a sermon, because my worst sermons are the ones that I go, it's Saturday, I just got to throw something together. So it's kind of a process during the week.
Yep.
So we do that, and it's about trying to find what. So very few of us would recycle sermons, because actually it's about saying what's relevant today, and what is relevant this Sunday compared to last Sunday is just last year's equivalent is vastly different. We were in the midst of COVID, and one of my sermon resources is a podcast I listen to, and they're based in the States and towards Canada in the north, and they've still not gone back to church, which in New Zealand, we've either got to say we've been lucky or it's been well managed, because we've actually had immense freedoms.
We have. David, what do you want to round off this conversation with?
Let's stay with the busy thing, because I think that's just so easy to get on that treadmill. And so, look, I'm in transition between roles, and so I've probably gone through a whole lot of different phases, from a little bit of anger that was changing and a bit of denial, and I'm in a pretty reflective space at the moment. And one of the things I've been thinking is I probably started to get on that busy treadmill, and what am I going to change going forward? I also turned 50 a couple of years ago, and that I guess in no way was it a crisis for me, but it was certainly a point at which I went, I've spent 20 years focused on raising children. What's the next 20 years focused on? And at part it's focused on what retirement might look like, but actually it's more than that. And it's perhaps not getting on that busyness treadmill, but, and I like what you just said, I worked too hard for that. How do we work hard to create the lifestyle we want,
the space,
and the space we want? And I would have to say, I live in Hawke's Bay. What could be a better space to find great music, great food, great wine, great beaches, wonderful climate. So it's kind of about whether you're a person of the church, of any faith or no faith, what is the meaning in your life? What is it that you want to achieve? That's not just financial wealth, but is a richness in life.
Yeah. Is there a life after working in the church for you?
I'm kind of hoping so. It's interesting. I've got some wonderful colleagues who have done probably their best ministry in their early retired years and then have fully retired into life beyond the church. I personally think I will be doing... I still feel called to do what I'm doing, so I'm not looking to exit stage left from ministry anytime soon. Really enjoy what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the daily challenges. I enjoy the fact that very rarely is one day the same as the next.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yep.
Yeah, does that kind of answer that?
It's good enough. It's good enough. Yeah, I think so. Is there? I was going to ask, what's it been like for your kids having a father who's a minister? But I'm asking, they're not here to ask.
They're not. But what I can tell you is that for parts of their life, that's been kind of difficult because it's not cool to have a dad who's a priest in the church and wears one of those funny collars. But it's all about context. So actually, interestingly, in where we live, there's a Baptist church that has got an amazing youth ministry. And so many of my kids' friends go to a church-based youth group. So it was actually, I'd have to say here, it's been more easy for them just to slot in.
Yep.
And probably my son's a little bit more extroverted, and he kind of likes it as a talking point sometimes, I suspect.
Dad's a bit of a celebrity.
Well, no, not Dad's a celebrity, but a novelty.
Novelty.
Sorry,
that was a bit of a stretch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And, the thing that I'm just trying to think of all the ministers I've had, it's always a combination. So Sue has always been there. I think of the two of you very much as a team. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So interesting. We're having that conversation right now because over the last 5-6 years, I've been on the road a lot, and so I did a stint here at the cathedral, and the family. This is where they've settled. And now that I'm going back to be a parish priest, I've said to them, I don't expect you to follow, So we're just having that open conversation at the moment as to whether they continue here or come to Hastings or do an amalgam of the two. I don't know. But yeah, without the support of Sue and the family, what I've done would have been different.
Mm.
It would have been possible, but it would have been very different.
Mm. David, thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed your company, and I was excited about this conversation. It's funny, I was nervous about this conversation because it was like, don't cock this up. It's it's classic, and they're all different. All the podcasts are different, and I enjoy that. And I thought, I felt a real privilege being able to sit down with you today. And yeah, I have really enjoyed it. And it's been interesting how emotional I felt going back through those times. And I remember, I was with my mother when she rang you from Canada, and it was interesting how going back and thinking about that and so that was a real extra for me today to have that chance to reflect back on that time.
And for those who listen to this, there have been one or two moments that I've nearly gone, you're not in the room, but you need to know there's a moment happening. We're having a moment. Hope you're part of it.
Yeah. As
you listen.
Yeah, I think they'll pick it up. It was. Look, I'm going to ask you to close, but I'll just go back to when I talked to Doug Weaver when we found out that Jude had terminal cancer and she was 50, and she had a melanoma that had activated and so forth. There was nothing they could do. And I remember saying to Doug over the phone, life's not fair. And he came back and said, who told you life was fair? And I remember at the time thinking, be nice,
Yeah.
But you know what? It was just before I flew out to Canada, it was a really great message of life is not fair, and nobody's ever said that life is fair.
Yep.
And it really helped me.
Absolutely.
Really helped me.
So over coffee before, I said to you, and one of the sayings that I learnt when I was living in Pahiatua was, in life there are no mistakes or failures, only learnings. And life isn't fair, but what do we learn out of that? What do we learn out of that experience? And part of not getting on that busyness wheel is reflecting on what's happening to us and what's happening around us so we can learn from it.
And on that note, David, thank you very much for your time. Good luck with the next stage and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.